What are the pros and cons of camming, and how does OnlyFans map into this? Did you switch to OnlyFans at some point?
I did, yeah. I came for like 5 or 6 years, and I burned out eventually.
What are the good aspects? What are the bad aspects of camming?
Well, the good aspects were that it was just your own terms. You get to decide. Everything about it is under your control, which I loved at the time. I was like, I can work when I want, how I want, any sort of expression. I experimented, and I was very successful. I was making around $200 an hour, which for that website at the time was like pretty good. I had elaborate routines. I was a mime. I would do like dress up as a mime and then dress up a chair, and I would seduce the chair.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, or like
So it was almost. Was there an artistic element to it almost?
yeah, very much. I had
Did you
like
talk
gnomes.
to the chair? You had gnomes?
No, I was a mime. You don't. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Right.
Yeah, get it straight, dude.
These are, you know what I really appreciate about you is I'm asking some really dumb questions and you're answering it in a very intelligent way. So I appreciate that. All right. Did you ask the chair questions? I was a mime, you fucking idiot. Okay, I'm sorry. That's true.
Yeah.
But there's gnomes on the like big gnomes or small gnomes?
Like lawn gnomes.
Lawn gnomes? And you seduced the lawn gnome on the chair. The gnome is sitting on the chair.
There were some gnomes on the chair. I did a photo set which I submitted to Reddit where I got abducted. I was like stripping, taking my clothes off, and then slowly the gnomes surrounded me in the background and then dragged me off. And I did this as a photo set. And
consensually?
I didn't feel consensual in the photos, but
okay.
But it was the 11th
not consent
top post
with the gnomes.
It was very successful on Reddit, basically. It was a top post on Gone Wild and the 11th top post of all time on Reddit.
Which I think probably just means it's like it's artistic, it's interesting, it's edgy, it's funny, so it's really, really well done.
But it was really shocking to me that nobody else was doing anything creative with sex work. Like for me, it was like breathing. Like you're just doing sex and you're bored. I'm like, what do you do? I don't know. Let's try something funny. Like it's just the natural progression. And it felt to me like there was almost no competition. Like I would just be really creative and like immediately was the top not safe for work post on Reddit. I'm like, well, I didn't even try that hard. And so it's really shocking to me that other women who are doing this sort of thing.
Is that still a little bit of the case? Like that there's not as much like, because from my sort of outsider perspective, that seems to be still the case. Like there's not, like as you describe it, that's kind of cool. That's like almost like playing, like having fun with sexuality almost.
Yeah.
But that does require kind of thinking through. It's almost like a creative project, like a photography project or something like that, or almost like a little skit movie. It's interesting.
It's this vibe of like, how can you like bring like vibrant novelty to whatever you're doing, anything you're doing.
Yeah.
And I really like doing this with surveys too. Like I've been doing a lot of standard surveys, but I'm also like experimenting with novel, creative, artistic surveys. I'm like, how do you ask a question in a way that's like beautiful and unusual and like a thing that's completely groundbreaking? Like nobody's ever like
you always make everything so poetic and romantic. It's disgusting. No. But yes, I think you have that engine in your head, I guess, of creativity. Like, the way you ask questions, which is not trivial to do. Like it's actually very difficult to do, like good survey questions. And I mean, we're joking, but like, almost like poetic, because you have to ask a question in a way that doesn't lead to the answer.
Yes.
Like you have to kind of inspire them to think and then indirectly get at the truth. It's just it's an art form, honestly.
Yeah, and also in a way where they don't misinterpret the question, because it's amazing how any question you think, oh, this is the clearest question possible. No, you're wrong. It has to be even clearer.
Right, willingly or unwillingly, because like you also have to defend against that question being criticized later when you publish about it. All of that, you have to think about all of that.
I think this might be my greatest strength. So I'm not very good at statistics. I'm not like great at presenting data, but I think probably my greatest strength is in fact survey design and like question phrasing. Because I have tweeted so many thousands of polls, and every single one I get people telling me like the way that they misinterpreted the poll. So it's like
you've become
gone through fire. And then again, I'm testing the phrasings all the time. Like what happens if you slightly shift phrasings? And so I'll do the same question test over time to see how it changes and like, the way the framing affects the results.
So the good and the bad of the camming. So you said good, what was it? I forgot. You said
freedom.
The freedom. Yeah. The freedom to be creative.
Yeah. And the bad is just it was exhausting. The site that I was on, the way that it's structured is that you're ranking on the site, and thus the amount of people that see you, and thus the amount of money you earn, is affected by the amount of money that you earn on average over the last 60 days. So if you're streaming and nobody's tipping you, this means that you're going to be dropping down in the rankings, which is going to make it harder in the future.
Okay, so the rich get richer in that site?
Yeah, so it's very high pressure. Like if you're on, you need to be making money as fast as you can. if
Yeah.
you want to continue to make money. So that was really stressful. It was very mentally taxing. I would do it for a couple hours and just log off and be completely exhausted because you're just like on as hard as you can.
Mhm.
And this is why I have a little PTSD around streaming. Like I've considered Twitch streaming and I tried a little bit and I'm like I haven't fully integrated the fact that you don't have to be like maximally entertaining every single second yet. You can actually just chill out and take it slow and nothing bad happens.
Yeah. You can just enjoy silence.
Yeah.
Did you feel lonely doing it? I mean, even just streamers feel lonely.
I moved
Like-
into a house of cam girls.
Does that make it better or worse?
Better. They're great. I'm still friends with them to this day.
Oh, so it was like a team, almost like we're in this kind of together.
Yeah. So we would like work together and, you know, stream together and swap our clothes and stuff. It was great.
Swap ideas too.
Swap
Like-
ideas. Yeah.
And actually, on a small tangent, maybe a big tangent, what do you think? Because it's the recent controversy of Andrew Tate, and that he, I think, in the past ran a camming business, and he's being accused of sex trafficking. What do you think? Like from your own experience, what do you understand about Andrew Tate? Is he a good person? Is he a bad person? Is there something shady about his practices or not?
I wish I could answer, but I don't know. I haven't looked into it at all.
At
I've
all.
heard people talking about it. I just haven't bothered to go into it.
Okay.
It is well known that, like, when I was doing it back in the day, that Eastern European models had something different going on, though. It was like a trope about, you know, there's the Eastern European models and then there's everybody else.
That they're what? It's like darker or something like
Like
that?
they do studios and they're lower quality.
Which means what?
Like studios are, you go into like a warehouse and then they have set up a little like things that replicate bedrooms,
Yeah.
but they're just like stalls. And then you rent out or you pay the studio a percentage of your income. And
Yeah.
you can tell when something looks like a studio. It's like a type of background.
Yeah.
That if you're like watching enough, it kind of starts to, you notice the patterns.
So like the standards are lower there and the ethical boundaries are a little looser.
Yeah.
How people are treated.
It's I never heard anything about the ethical side. I just knew that it was like lower quality. Like the girls seemed like they were less into it and like cared
Sure.
less.
How does this all interplay with like sex trafficking? So consensual versus not consensual.
I would be shocked if there were never any non-consensual camming. I mean, I guess it's like if it were going to happen, I wouldn't be surprised if it were in fact Eastern European models. Based on this is outdated. I'm just thinking of my stereotypes back when I cammed a lot.
Sure. So some of that is stereotypes versus like collecting good data, right?
Yeah, I haven't
it's
done
hard to
data
know.
on cam girl.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard. It's even hard to get that data, right?
Yeah,
But obviously a really important problem.
there's a method that I'm trying that I really like. I designed a survey type, which is like asking people who you know.
Yeah.
Like who do you know who's done this? And you tell me like, oh, do you know anybody who's a doctor? Do you know anybody who has had cancer or like smokes or I don't know.
Personally, you mean?
Yeah, personally. Just
Yeah.
do you know anybody?
Yeah.
And then if you ask about a whole bunch of things, you can calibrate the responses. So like
That's really interesting.
if your population, 20% of them know doctors, and then you know the actual amount of doctors, then you can tell like how this is corresponding. Like what is the visibility of doctors?
So you can reconstruct the graph.
Basically,
network.
yeah. And we can do this with sex trafficking. And of course, people are going to be like, well, sex trafficking is not visible. People, you don't know those. I'm like, well, then we can ask about other non-visible things that other people don't know that we do have data for.
Mhm.
Like homelessness or being in jail or like if you have been like sexually assaulted. A lot of people don't like talking about if they've been sexually assaulted. So you can do a whole bunch of things that are like similarly suppressed in knowledge in some way that we do actually have rates for.
Mhm.
And then compare that to the graph when we ask people, do you know anybody who's been sex trafficked?
Yeah.
So again, this is not perfect. I'm not saying this is
But
ideal.
you can
like,
infer things. You can infer things about that
Right.
graph.
But I'm saying we don't have good ways of measuring sex trafficking right now. Anyway, I did a big deep dive into the research that we have on sex trafficking in the Western world. And the actual, like, I read the studies and like reports about the studies, and it's really pitiful. We have terrible data. It's like, there's just like vague estimations made from one guy in a basement in the 80s. That's like the basis for like one big study that like a lot of people report on. And so I'm like, okay, so the method I'm proposing obviously is not perfect, but like the bar is so low at this point.
Well, I wonder also if there's ways to design a survey that gets at the victims of sex trafficking, also, which is they presumably have public access to the internet,
Mm.
and I wonder how many of them are distinctly aware that they're victims. Like it's asking the question. When you're inside of a toxic relationship, are you inside of a toxic relationship? I mean, if the toxic relationship is truly toxic, sometimes your mind is fucked with, right? You don't even know what's true.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting if you can design surveys
For
that
people who are
break,
actively sex trafficked?
who could break through that. So
Mhm.
basically, get data on how many people are getting sex trafficked directly.
Oh, yeah. Like if you don't frame it, like if you don't say the word sex trafficking, if
Yeah.
you're like, are you just in a situation where you'd,
And maybe through the survey, I mean, that's very meta, but through the survey, help them.
I did this is what started my relationship surveys. So I've done a series of relationship surveys, and that was because I knew somebody in a terrible relationship. And I was like, I bet if she took a survey where she answered questions about her relationship and at the end got a score that compared her to everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
she'd be like, oh, wait, everybody else has much better relationships than I do. So that's why I started making the relationship surveys, was exactly for that reason.
Yeah, that's really, really, really powerful to know that like you're not crazy for thinking this is a bad relationship.
Right. Or I think like the actual question is like, could you do better if you broke up? And I think that the thing that keeps most people in their relationships is like, this is the best that I can do.
Right.
And like, this is normal. And if it were normal, I would say that they are right. Like if we live in a culture where everybody is abusing their people in their relationships, then yeah, what are you going to do? Break up and then just be alone for the rest of your life? Most people don't want to do that.
But now comparing yourself to this to the average is good to know.
Yeah.
To know.
No, your options are.
Or at least understand it, because being normal is not always, like this conversation is not always great. Meaning this conversation is anything but normal. Okay, and that was a tangent about a niche passion, which is really fascinating that you're playing with those kinds of ideas of survey design. But back to camming. So, what were the cons? What were the negatives of camming?
Oh, like the exhaustion of just like live, like the high pressure thing.
Yeah.
That was probably the worst thing.
So what about the interaction with different people? Like the dynamics of the interaction with the fans, I guess.
I had a pretty great time. I mean, it obviously wasn't perfect because it's the internet, but I don't know. This is the thing that confuses me a lot, because a lot of women that I know complain about being harassed by men quite a lot. They're like, men are always, groping our ass. You have to be paranoid in the club. People are like, they're always huffing on you, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, get away, man. And I do not have this experience. Or like, maybe I do, but I'm interpreting it differently. I don't know. But the thing is, I don't know what causes me to have such a different experience from these women that are like feel really hostile towards men.
Mhm.
And my guess is that there's some sort of like very subtle signaling that we're accidentally doing. They're like, no fault of our own. I'm not saying this is a virtue. I'm saying like maybe it's just genetic, or the fact that I'm
The
tall.
women are doing?
Yeah, that the women are doing, yeah.
Okay.
Like that, and it might be just something I'm completely accidentally, through no intention, like happening to signal the thing that is causing men to not view me as like a desirable target, or like a
Interesting.
target at all.
Well, what about the flip side? Maybe you're not sensitive to the creepy stare.
Yeah, that also might be true.
The dude who's like is undressing you with his eyes, that like in a creepy way, that you're just not, you don't like worry about it. You're not touched, like that the fear of that, the anxiety of that, the unpleasantness of that just doesn't hit you.
I think that's also at least part of it, maybe all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some evidence for it. I think often like guys will do a thing to me, and I'm just like, that's a thing, cool. I don't have any negative response whatsoever.
That's call back to the tire. It's a thing. This is nice.
Yeah.
that happened. Well, it's good to know that can happen.
Like I once had like a homeless guy like ask me to come back to my place, baby, and I was like, this is fun.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, do you want me to? I love asking men like, are you trying to get me to have sex with you? Just like saying it out front, and they'll be like, well, usually they stop for a minute. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, I would like to have sex, and they'll be like, thanks for asking, but I'm not interested in having sex with you. How you have a good day, and then I walk away, and that's great. I don't know. I have no issues with that interaction, but like maybe this is the kind of thing that other women would find to be really offensive.
So you have that conversation, and it doesn't turn into like a threatening feel.
No,
like with a homeless guy.
No, I've never had that happen though. But I think there's just something. I think I'm doing something. Like again, this is kind of accidental. Like I just am like this always, and I think I just happen to be like this at people, and they don't expect it.
Yeah.
Like they don't expect me to be like really nice while explicitly asking them what their intentions are. Like directly putting my finger on the thing that like, oh, you're trying to have sex with me, and then also not judging them for it.
Yeah.
I think this like throws people off a little bit so they don't get aggressive. They're like, oh, you're autistic or something.
Even the cloak of anonymity on the internet, you weren't getting.
Yeah, I just think I'm just not reactive, or maybe I'm giving off. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's a feedback loop. So I had a pretty good experience. I know not everybody did. Definitely people reported having antagonistic experiences. But when I was scamming, I generally really liked people. Were really nice to me. Had a great time. Made friends.